Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. In today's video, we're going to take a look at a question raised by a Turbo360 customer who wanted to know more about the best way to monitor and operate a solution on Azure that uses a combination of service bus and function apps. I had a bit of a chat with that customer, and I thought it would be a really good video to put together just as an education piece to help other people understand how Turbo360 can help you here. Now, this is going to be a bit of a longer video than some of the ones I usually do, and we're going to go through sort of from soup to nuts how to go about setting up our monitoring, what kind of things we can monitor and manage, and we'll just go through this example architecture, and hopefully it'll all come together really nicely. So the first thing we need to do is we need to think about in Turbo 360 we've got multiple modules that can help you with different types of monitoring. So we've got things like Cost Analyzer here, which are for cost management, Documenter, which is about generating documentation, and then there's two modules that can help you with this kind of architecture. So Business Activity Monitoring module is the one that's going to help you track the business transactions going through this process. So for example, every order that I might process, you can track, give self-service to users to see what's going on with these orders. That's the kind of business process side of the monitoring. And today in this video, we're going to look at the kind of component and technical monitoring, so the IT support side of the solution. And for that, we're going to use the business applications module here. And that'll help us create a much more simplified view of what our solution looks like and help us support it. So let's have a look at the example architecture. So we're going to take a look at one of the demo environments that we've got, and I'm going to walk through. So obviously the first thing that'll jump out is there's not a service bus on this yet. So I'm going to just explain how this demo evolved. It's based on a real world scenario, and often a customer is building together an evolving architecture over a period of time. And I think as you plug in new pieces, evolving your monitoring solution is a really great thing to do. So you want to make it really simple to set this up and monitor it. So the customer here started with this component called the Booking API. So they had a web app that was built. They used API management, and they had a simple back end for this API to save and retrieve an order. And that was held in Cosmos DB. So that was kind of their starting point. But they knew they were going to do other things with this architecture as they build more into it. Now, what they did have at a platform level, they had things like App Insights, Log Analytics, Key Vault. And as they started building the architecture, they realized that there was a lot of challenges around how they're going to monitor and operate this. And it was always going to keep falling back onto the expert developer to do everything. So we want to be able to simplify this a lot to free up people's time, potentially get level 2 people in the support team able to help with part of this solution. So the next thing that they did as the architecture evolved is they added on the ability for partners to submit bookings, and then they'd have a background process. So over here, we've got the booking API, and we were going to be loading in orders into the bookings into the API, but these were coming from business partners over here, and business partners were going to be integrating into Service Bus. How they do that over here doesn't really matter for this demo. We're really going to focus on the use case of we process these events that are coming in, and we're going to do things with it. So what was happening was the demo that have a function that reads from Service Bus, and then it's writing to a stream of these events that are coming in, and there was different things that were being built to process these orders coming in. So one of the examples was a function app that would basically get every booking that came in, and it would save it to the booking API so they become available in the website. The second function they had down here was basically like a data cleansing sort of exercise. So let's just call that the clean function. And what they were doing is they're reading off the event hub, rationalizing, cleaning the data, getting it ready for a data analytics tool they were going to build after that. So they pushed those clean events onto a different event hub, and then in the final part of their architecture, they started building this booking analytics bit over here, where they'd start processing that into Cosmos DB tables, and then eventually they put a data factory on and they were copying it to a relational data warehouse, and then they had Power BI for visualizing all their events. So that was kind of the evolving big picture over a long period of time. Now, what we're going to look at in this video is we're predominantly going to focus on this booking events subcomponent here. So we're looking at the functions and the service bus. Predominantly we'll look at these two here, but we'll also look at these a little bit as well, and we'll kind of see how they can play in. But what I want people to do is be aware of the big picture, because you'll see other bits as we look at Turbo360. The ability to know what the big picture looks like is going to really help your support team. So let's have a little bit of a look at a few Turbo360 things then. So if I jump over here and we're on the Turbo360 homepage, I'm just going to get my pen so I can use it when I need it. So on the top here, we've got the 4 modules that I referenced on the diagram earlier. So the one we're going to be looking at is this business application module here. Now, if we click into that, okay, so we can see we've got the tree view on the left-hand side. And this is where we start modeling out our support-friendly view of what this landscape looks like. So in a real company, you're going to have lots of different applications doing different things. You want to be able to model these in a way that you're kind of not tied to where things are deployed, because that makes the support team's job very difficult to understand what things work together to solve a problem. So here you can see I've got this support-friendly view. We've got our integration platform, the customer-facing apps we've got over here, and I've got this demo called Covi Reservations, and you can see under here there's a number of components. So I've got my booking API, my booking processor, and then some of those transactional elements to it as well. And we're going to take a look at the booking processor application in this particular video, and you'll be able to see here that I've got a number of components that make up this application. So we've got things like the event hub, the service bus, the functions, and in a moment we're going to start looking at how we've configured that. Now, to begin with, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show how you would set up a new application. So let's imagine we've got our solutions live. We want to start getting it under some monitoring. So we'll create a new business application group. I'll then choose where is it that my stuff's deployed. So I'm going to choose this subscription here. Now we can bring into this support-friendly business application, we can bring in components from different subscriptions, different tenants, different resource groups. It doesn't really matter where they're deployed. We can group them together as a supportable unit. So what I might do, if we think of that architecture we had before, so I might bring in my application insights so I can leverage some of the stuff that's in there to help me. I might bring in my function apps. So I think we had the event processor function app. Now I can also bring in individual functions here as well. So you can see obviously the blue dot is telling me I've already got these in an app, but in this case I can bring in these 3 functions here. A resource that I'm adding to a business app in Turbo360, you can actually add it to multiple applications if you want to sort of have different people looking at it from different perspectives, so you can do all that kind of stuff. I think I might, so we'll add my event hub, I think was one of the components we had, so we'll add the booking one. And then if you notice down here on the service bus area, so what's quite interesting is we're not just monitoring at the service bus level, we can add individual queues and topics to my application here. So what I can do is, let's say, in my service bus, I might have 300 queues that are serving different use cases, but there's only maybe one that I care about for this application. So we could add that queue, or we could add that topic. Now, the next thing we would do is we then add a way of configuring the monitoring here. So I've got 3 choices to make. I can either do skip now and set this up later. I can set up the rules in bulk. So if you imagine if I had multiple function apps, I can just set them all up in one go. Or I can also apply a profile. So if you think of a profile as being like common default settings that you might use to monitor an application. So if you're building a lot of applications that are very similar, a profile is a good way to set up some default metrics, and then you can just apply them to the application when you set it up. So in my case here, I've got the Kovi reservations monitoring profile that I would reuse. The next thing I would do is I'd decide how often do we want to check our monitoring settings, and then I can configure things like how often how do I want to get my alerts. So I could say send me alerts to Teams. We could do channels like ServiceNow. We could do emails, DevOps work. And there's a various range of channels we've got for sending you a notification. And then the last bit would be if I click Create Business Application at this point. This is going to go and create the app, and it's going to go and start straight away looking to monitor that application with the rules that you've configured during the setup process. So really using a profile, I can go from 0 to having it fully monitored just in a few clicks. That would be that up and running. So hopefully that gives you an overview of how to set the application up. So let's have a look at the one that I've already got in place. So we said that we've got a few resources that I've already added here. So we can see, if I click on the resource link, you can see you've got the list of them here. We can see they're currently all healthy. Now, we get features at 2 levels in Turbo360. So we have features at the resource level, and we have features at the application level. And I think the application level is the bit that you don't really get in the Azure portal. It's very difficult to see that concept of an application. The resources themselves, what we're trying to do is create a support view of the resource. So in the Azure portal, you're going to have a lot of developer features that would require quite high privileges, and you don't really want your support person to get into all those extra complexities about, you don't want them to risk breaking it by having too many permissions, but also you don't want to overcomplicate it. We really want to focus on the use case of how do we support this solution. So we're going to start with the application level features. So the first one I'm going to show you is the service map. Now, if you imagine if we have an issue in the architecture, we get an alert comes out, we can click through to the business application from the alert, but you might also be looking at the tree view and you want to heat zone into where your problem is. So you can see on the tree view on the left, I've got a sort of traffic light idea, so I can see the health of all my components. So you can see in my infrastructure area, I've got a few red ones going on here for some servers that are offline at the moment. But in my booking processor app, we're looking green. And then the service map, what we'll attempt to do is when you set the application up, we'll try and work out a few of the dependencies from the ARM definitions, and then you probably won't get all the way to the full diagram, but you'll get a bit of a layout of what some of it looks like. And then what I usually do when I've set the app up, just take 30 seconds to go and tweak the diagram so it looks like the Visio diagram that you've used during the development cycle. So you'll see this looks a lot like what that component looked like in my whiteboard earlier. And really what we're trying to do here is the idea is the support person might not have had a problem with this application for a few weeks. They come in and they may not remember what the app looks like. So we're creating some context here by showing, we've got the queue here, we've got a function that processes from the queue to the event hub, and then we've got 2 other functions that process off here. And these are currently all green because everything's healthy, but I can click on these and you can see there the metrics we're currently monitoring and the properties. So we've currently got 1 dead letter message. I think my threshold's probably about 5 or 6 before it triggers an alert, so we'll have a look at that later. You can see I've got my function here is currently being monitored, and I've got no failures, and that individual function's currently enabled. So I'm making sure there is disable properties set to false. Now, that I think when you think about the monitoring we're setting up here, it's quite handy to be able to look at the individual function level. I think as a developer, we often think about the application as a whole, but the support person really needs to know what is each of my functions doing. And actually, if we had a function app, we could have two different functions, and the function app could live in different Turbo360 business applications because you're not tied to the deployment model. It's a much more sort of logical support view as opposed to a physical deployment view. So I could have, these functions here, and then my book and API functions are in a different app. Okay, so after the service map, the next application level feature we have is the dashboard. So what we're trying to do with the dashboard is we want to create a one-pager with some of the key metrics that would give the support person a view of what's happening with this application. So you can customize this dashboard to have whatever you want on it. So if I go through the process of creating a new one, you can have multiple dashboards as well. So I could create a new dashboard here. I could have a widget on it. So let's say we have a widget that's a line graph. And you can see from the resource type here, so I can choose metrics from the resources, or I can also choose KQL queries from App Insights or Log Analytics. So if I choose my function app, and then I'll choose to group by metric, and then let's say we have the data in, data out, maybe make that an average. So then I get my IO for the function app as a graph, and I can put multiple other widgets on at the same time. And that would be how I can create my single one-pager of what's going on. So if you look at the dashboard I've got here, I've got things like the function response time, so that would come from the function app itself, function executions. I've got some data from the event hub, which gives me an idea of what's being processed. This widget down at the bottom here, the dependencies widget, I'm using a KQL query against App Insights to look for how the dependencies are performing. So I think, if I remember right, this is the count of how many you've executed, but you could equally do something like the latency of the dependencies or how many errors you're getting. So this is really a count of how many we're executing. So we can see the book and API is being used quite a bit. And then I've also got metric counters from the service bus down at the bottom. So we'll just have a quick look at how we've configured the service bus one, just to show what that looks like. So if I edit this widget here, you can see I've picked the service bus queue as the resource type. And then from the metrics that are available, I think I've got incoming and outgoing messages to show me what's going through that queue. But I could equally put other widgets with things like errors or dead letter counts or something like that. And the key idea here, though, is create that dashboard that's really going to present how this app's doing for your support person. So every application on the tree view can have one or more dashboards that are kind of cross-component, a bit like a workbook in a way, but just with all that extra context that helps the support person understand where this fits. Now, the next feature we have at application level is the automated tasks. So what I can do with an automated task is I can create something for the support operator to run. So I'm imagining a scenario with a dead letter message. If you want the support person who's not necessarily an Azure expert to go and resubmit dead letter messages, that can be quite a challenging task for them to do and for you to set up for them to do safely. So you're going to have to give them appropriate permissions in Azure. You may have many queues and you only want them to submit messages from one queue, not all the other ones, because there might be different business functions using different queues. So that just starts getting really challenging to do safely. So what we can do is we can create an automated task here. So I could create this process dead letter messages every night. And I could choose which queue do we want to receive from, which one do we want to send it to. So we could even potentially send it to a different queue. And I'd configure this task, and then if the support person wanted to run this task on demand, they could do something like resubmit everything for the last hour. Or we could even set this task to be able to run every night or every week, just on a recurring fashion, and we could just have the support person let that automation go and resubmit messages for them, and they can just deal with any exceptions. Okay, so if we, I think the last thing maybe to mention on the tree view at the application level, the other quite powerful feature here is we have user management at the tree level. So if you imagine in the deployment model in Azure, it gets really complicated for them non-Azure experts to have just the right permissions that you need them to have. So, often you'll have people will deploy something to a resource group, and then if you want them to have like a certain permission on different resources, it gets really complicated to configure and maintain those RBAC permissions. And if you start adding other people to it, again, it just gets more complicated. So what we can do on the tree view here is we can manage user access at the tree level itself. So I could say, if I had, say, two support people, I could give, the simplest would be just give somebody reader to the booking processor and give somebody a support operator role. And that would let them maybe take action versus just read the metrics and get the alerts and that kind of thing. So you can, and because we're only putting in just the resources that matter for the booking processor, we're really restricting the risk of them accidentally having access to a resource we don't expect them to have. So we have a lot of customers who would be taking users out of the Azure portal and getting them to do support in Turbo360 because you can do it in a much more easy to control, configure, least privilege way. You can also do some things with this with custom roles. So, for example, I can create a role if I wanted to have something that wasn't just reader or writer, effectively the equivalent. I could do something where I can create things like here you can see I've got can I create dashboards or just read them? Can I create service maps or just read them? But then I also have features for the different resource types in Azure as well, whether you can, change, execute like say a reprocess or a trigger of a function versus just read it. But you'll see in a minute when we look at the resources how you don't have all of those extra developer features. It's really just the support features that we're doing here. So if I give them access to operate on a function, I'm not giving them permission to be able to go and redeploy the function or anything like that that you would get with the Azure portal as a contributor. Okay, so next up we're going to have a look at the service bus queue and what can we do with, we're going to start looking at the resource level features now. What can we do with that? So first off, you can see we've got our list of resources, and if at any point I want to check these, I could also just click here and see these are the metrics I'm currently monitoring. And if I go down to the queue itself, so again, remember that we might have many queues, so I could, here I'm looking at like a business function. This booking process is like an application, but I could also have another business application in Turbo360 where I just put all my queues in and I can holistically manage all my queues in one place. And I can have, this new reservations queue could be looked at from a horizontal perspective where I'm looking at all my queues, and then I can have another business app where it's a vertical about what's the business function for this component. So here you can see I clicked on the queue, the overview is showing me some of the key metrics about what's going on, incoming and outgoing messages recently. I can update this dashboard by changing the time settings here. You can see I've currently got one message on the dead letter queue. Now, next we have, so there's a couple of things up here. If you've given the user the right permission to be a manager of the queue as opposed to like a reader, I can do things like send messages, purge the queue. I can do things like view the properties, update the status. I can also process messages if I've got the right Turbo360 permission, so I could go and read messages if you want me to. I can also act on the dead letter queue. So I think we saw we had one message on the queue. So let's have a look if we can see that. So here you can see the message we have on the dead letter queue. We've got a bit of detail about it. I can also go and view the details of the message. So I can view message details here. This is one of my booking events that got an error. I can also view the error details here. So there's a bit of data about why it dead lettered, so maximum retries. And then I've got some options at this point. So before we were talking about the automated task for resubmission. So the automated task, I can create this almost like a batch job in a way where it'll be just one click and I can run it and reprocess a lot of messages. And here I can do individual messages, so I could maybe go and just resubmit it. So I can choose that queue to resubmit it to. And then if I click the resubmit button down the bottom here, that will just send that back to the queue for reprocessing. I've also got the option here to send it to an API endpoint, so I can configure an endpoint and maybe I push it to a logic app and the logic app goes and does some stuff and then puts it on a queue or does some alternative compensation, which could be quite interesting. We have the option to repair and resubmit as well. So if there was something wrong with the message, you can go and update it and fix the message. Maybe there was a character encoding issue you can correct. You can update the properties and then drop it back onto the queue as well, and then that can be reprocessed. So we've got the ability to do some of these common tasks that you would want to do for support and service bus. And then if we come to the monitoring section, so here we've got a list of things that we can monitor. So the first thing to note is these rules here. These are if you wanted, if you set up to do everything by hand yourself on each resource, this is where you could come in and you could say, I want to make sure that if I have a disabled queue, then it's going to raise an error. And you can do something like here. I could say, if the count of dead letter messages in a queue exceeds 10, we'll raise a warning. 20 will raise an error. So here, if you note, these ones are using the metrics. And then if you look further down, we also have the properties available for the queue. So there's a few subtle differences here about, I think the metrics probably slightly behind the property, because I think there's a very, very subtle delay on some of the Azure monitor metrics being fully up to date. So you could do it here. If I did it, we'd be doing an API call behind the scenes to count how many messages on the queue versus querying the metrics. There's a couple of additional counters you can get here for each one. So to set the monitoring up, it's as simple as just tick the one you want, set your threshold, add a note over here that'll appear in your alert if you want to give the support user some guidance. If you wanted a compensation for this metric failing, you can configure an action. So that would link you to an automated task that you might create. So we've got quite a good automated task actually for a run book. So you could maybe say if this alert goes into an unhealthy state and it's this metric, go and run a run book and we'll execute some code to go and tidy some stuff up. So the next thing is, this is me setting up the individual rules, but really in my case, I set the profile up previously. So I click on the profiles, you can see I've got Covi reservations, and here I can click on it and I can see the things I'm inheriting from the profile. So I've got things like the state, user errors, and dead letter count are the three things that I'm currently monitoring for this queue. So for me, because I used the profile when I set the app up, I wouldn't have had to go and configure all this stuff myself. I could just inherit it from the profile and I'd be up and running. So I hope that's a good overview of the service bus queue. Some of the features that we've got there that are very support operator friendly. It's really focused on what you need to do to monitor, maintain, and operate a queue. Next up, we're going to have a look at the functions. So we'll start off with a function app. So here we added both functions and the function app itself as two separate things in this Turbo360 app. So here I've got my event processor function app, and we can click on it and we can see the states currently running for this app. Excuse me. So if we click on the app itself, we'll get a couple of things will start coming up. So the first ones, we'll get a dashboard showing us what's going on with this function. Excuse me, with this function app. So these dashboard widgets are all driven by the metrics for the function app itself, so we can see a bit of what's going on with the utilization, the I/O, some of the response codes. If your support operator has permissions, you can also do some of the common support tasks. So I could stop it, restart it, or the two common examples. Again, we don't have the option for things like redeploying, which a developer would have in the Azure portal, and And often we see support operators are given the contributor permission, which would let the person who doesn't really know what they're doing as a developer, they're just supporting the application, but suddenly you've given them that extra permission where they could accidentally do something wrong. Now, when we look at monitoring for the function app, if we go to the monitoring tab, we have all the different sort of settings that are available. So the common ones you might monitor are the state. We've got things like quotas and instances and metrics. Now, in my case, again, like before, I'm monitoring with the profile that I created with default settings on it. Now, one of the things I'm thinking, just looking at the video here, is I don't have all the things I probably should have on that profile from the looks of it. So there's a couple of things I can do at this point. So I could either go and set these up individually. So what I might do is say, go down to here and we'll have a look. So maybe I want to have things like the error count. So if my function app, if it starts having, say, more than 10 errors, we'll raise a warning. More than 20, not that high, we'll raise an error. We'll do that as an average as well, because this will be like a rolling kind of each time we check how many have we had since we last checked kind of idea. And I might do, can use some of these other counters if I want to monitor my memory being too high on the app or something like that. I can add all these here, and that's how easy it would be to set these up. Just check your threshold, save, that's it, done. Now, what I might do next then on my function app is I might decide I want to modify this dashboard. So, hopefully we've got all the things that you really care about, but if I wanted to add a custom widget here, I could go and edit it. And just like we did before on the dashboard for the application, you could create your own widget using one of the metrics. It'll be scoped at the level of this function app. But that, if I wanted to do, say, execution units or something like that, that's how I could add that to the out-of-the-box dashboard. Okay, so if we go from the function app to the individual functions now, so this is where I hope we start adding lots and lots of value. So, your application is you're going to be monitoring the thresholds and the metrics, and you get that application level. But we really want to go a bit deeper, and we want to know about the individual functions. So here you can see I've got my individual functions. We're going to maybe look at this reservation process one. So we can see these are the things that are currently happening. So we haven't had any failed invocations since we last checked. It's currently not disabled as well as what we're looking for. So if we go into the individual function itself, so there's a couple of things that we can do at this point. Okay, so here we are in the function. So the first thing we've got is the ability to have a dashboard here. Now, because I've got application insights as part, which the function app points to as part of this component, I can configure a dashboard widget that can leverage that application insights. So I'm going to choose a line graph for my requests. And we've got some helper queries that are already set up. So I'll have my request rate for the last 24 hours. You can see we've pre-populated a query, and I'm going to add that widget to this dashboard. So you can see those are the requests we've had recently. And then I might add, let's see, we add my latency. So really here you can see I've got by time, I've got how many requests and how long they've taken over the last 24 hours. I can also add ones like how many errors have I had, or some kind of summarization of the logs, focusing in on just this one function here. So I'll just save that, and then they'll be there next time, and when we come and look at the function, it'll execute them. The next thing is the invocation logs for the function. So you can see I've got all the runs here, and if I click on the ID, it's going to open up and show me the trace events that were logged for that execution of a function. So you'll be able to see any log events that you've captured. If I'm a support operator, I might also want to test my functions. So here we can give the support operator a permission to be able to send a message to a function if you wanted to. We also have the option to invocate, so we can we can configure something like a service bus queue. So if your function's triggered by a queue, we can have a link to a service bus queue here. We can send a message from Turbo360 to that queue, which will then trigger your function. So that can be really handy as well. And then on the monitoring side of things, there's a couple of things we can do here. So the first one is, again, you can see I've got my profile is configured for these. So the little icons tell me they're monitored in the profile. But I could override these here. But maybe you might have one function that's different to all your others. So you're taking off the default settings, and you can override it here. And maybe I say instead of 2 errors, I know this one quite regularly gets some bad data, so I might increase the threshold at 20 and 50 or whatever it might be, and then I would just save it, and that would increase the threshold, and I would take it off the profile. The other thing we can do with a function as well is I've got the query option here, so I can leverage my app insights, and I can potentially put a query in here, and I can you can see we've got a pre-populated query, so I can set a threshold, and I can in the background have Turbo360 execute this query and raise an error if I need to get an alert because I'm not happy with the result of that query. So that'll give me some quite easy to configure ways of getting good visibility of how this function's doing, raising alerts for various types of errors the function might have, and then we can have the support operators come in and sort of start addressing the issue. Now, I think the next couple of things to think about are, right, if we have a scenario that's quite custom to this application and we want to kind of like do our own thing a little bit. A really good common way customers might do that would be with an App Insights instance. So in here, I can put my own queries into Application Insights. So you can see I've got one by default here showing, show me the function level errors that are logged in the exception log in App Insights. So here you can see I've got some stuff which is to do with the event hub processor. Now, these errors, in the case of a function app, these might not indicate a run failure because the functions might have all been successful, but the function runtime under the hood might have been getting a few errors that we don't have visibility on. So this is a good way where I can store a custom query here, and I give the support operator a really easy way to execute it so they can see the results. So I could put a query in, save it. You can see up here I'd have my list of saved queries, so I can go and let just really basic bit of coaching from the developer setting the app up. You can show your support operator you've got a list of queries to help them. There's also a query library of some common queries that we have that you might want to use as a starter query, and you can go modify it from there. Now, if one of your queries, say this exception query, if this is a really common one that I want to monitor for, so what I could maybe do, let's say we take the top of that query, I could go and put a query in Turbo360 to be monitored. So with Application Insights, I've got all of the metrics I can monitor, just like we can with a lot of the other resources, but I could also do a custom query. So in this case, what I might do is I'll put my KQL query here, and I'll say, let's say make that the last 15 minutes. So if I execute my query here, so we get some results back. You see, I actually get the full logs. I might just modify. So we get back this one property, and I'll do a count, and I'll say if I get greater than 0, raise a warning, greater than 3, raise an error. And then what I can also do if I want is I can put a second query in here. So I can put a link to one of the queries that I might have saved. So if this alert fires, I can send the results of that query in my alerts. Imagine you get an email that says, we've had some errors. Here's a list of the errors that you've had. That might be quite a good way of giving the support person more info. So with this query here, I've saved it. Turbo360 is going to run in the background and just execute that query on a periodic basis and let you know if there's any problems from the results. And you can also put a note in here if you want to give some guidance to the support operator to help them know what to do. Now, at this point, if you think as we've gone through the different resources in the application, we're just hardening the supportability of it. So we've got a lot of things being monitored. It hasn't taken us very long to set this up. and we're just getting a better support experience because everything's really easy, transparent, and visible, but it's not too complicated to set it up. The next thing we might decide to do in this application, if you remember in the service map here, I have this booking API component. So let's pretend in this scenario, let's say the booking API is completely external to my organization, but this component depends on that booking API. And it might be the case that I haven't had any messages yet, but the booking API, my third party's gone offline. So when my messages run, I know they're going to fail. So can we do something to like preemptively check for that? So here I can use a feature we call API endpoint. Um, so what I can do is in the resources here, I can go and add a new API endpoint monitor. So I could say, let's just monitor Google as an example. So I've put Google in, I've got it as a get, but I can change the threshold there if I want. So we'll do a quick send. We can see we get a 200 back. Now, when I configure this, I can also do things like authorization types and headers or body. So I could do an example of a post to something if I wanted to. And in the monitoring, what I could do is I can add a rule. So for example, if we say, in this case, I might say, if the status code's not equal to 200, that would be an error condition. So we can go and raise an alert and somebody can jump in and do it. So if I just add this one now, so you'll see the new Google one's up here and it's just sitting waiting to be monitored. So in the background, we'll go and execute that endpoint monitor. So you can see here I've got a one that monitors my booking API endpoint. So it's just going to be regularly pinging that to see if we've got any errors, and it can raise an alert if we do. So you could use that endpoint monitor, for example, to ping your function app if you wanted, or ping a third-party dependency, or ping something like a logic app if you want to do it like a diagnostic test or some third-party service or something. You can do some really quite advanced stuff with that. So at this point, I think I've covered most of the things I want to cover in this video. So I'm going to just jump back to my slides really quickly, and I kind of hope if we reflect on what we've been through in this session. So we really focused on particularly how to monitor these two components here. I really wanted to get across this idea of what you can do with Service Bus, what you can do with functions, because functions is leveraging app insights a lot. You can use KQL to do quite a lot of stuff, whether it be from a visualization or a monitoring perspective. But also remember that a lot of people are doing things like log analytics, from things like Service Bus and other components like Logic Apps. You can do the same thing that you could do with App Insights, you can do with Log Analytics as well. So you can really take this monitoring to the next level. But hopefully you saw during the talk that also we can do these advanced features in a much more simple way while still maintaining a least privilege approach. And hopefully that matures your support experience for functions and Service Bus and other integration type scenarios like this. I hope this video is interesting to people. If you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, please let us know, and let us know the scenarios you're interested in, and we can do content to help with that. Thank you very much.